Fidel Castro, the very name evokes strong emotions. To some, he was a revolutionary hero, a David who stared down the American Goliath. To others, he was a ruthless dictator, crushing dissent and turning his island nation into a Cold War pawn. For over 5 decades, Castro dominated Cuba, his beard and fatigues becoming iconic symbols of defiance and revolution. Born in 1926, Castro's life spanned a tumultuous period in world history. From the rise and fall of fascism to the Cold War's nuclear tensions, Castro was a key player on the world stage. He challenged the United States, embraced Soviet communism, and inspired revolutionary movements across Latin America and beyond. This essay will delve into the life and legacy of this complex and controversial figure. It will explore his early years, his rise to power, and his enduring impact on Cuba and the world. Castro's story is a reminder of the power of ideas, the allure of revolution, and the enduring legacy of the Cold War. Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz was born on August 13, 1926, in the rural Oriente province of Cuba. His father, Angel Castro, was a Spanish immigrant who had found success as a sugarcane planter. Young Fidel grew up on his father's plantation, witnessing both the wealth it generated and the poverty that afflicted many Cuban workers. Despite his privileged upbringing, Castro developed a strong sense of social justice. He was an intelligent and ambitious student, excelling in academics and athletics. He attended Jesuit schools, where he received a rigorous education that exposed him to both classical literature and political philosophy. It was during his time at the University of Havana that Castro's political consciousness truly blossomed. He became deeply involved in student activism, protesting against corruption and social inequality. Castro joined the Orthodox Party, a left-wing political group that advocated for social reform and Cuban nationalism. After graduating with a law degree in 1950, Castro briefly practiced law, defending poor Cubans against powerful landlords and businesses. However, his legal career was cut short by the 1952 coup led by Fulgencio Batista. Batista, a former president, seized power in a military takeover, suspending the constitution and establishing an authoritarian regime. Castro, outraged by the coup, quickly became involved in the resistance movement. He joined other young revolutionaries in planning an armed uprising against Batista's dictatorship. On July 26, 1953, Castro led a daring but unsuccessful attack on the Moncada barracks, a military garrison in Santiago de Cuba. The attack failed, and Castro and his brother Raúl were captured and imprisoned. However, the Moncada assault, though a military defeat, became a rallying cry for the Cuban Revolution. Castro, during his trial, delivered a passionate speech, famously declaring, "History will absolve me." Released from prison in 1955 under a general amnesty, Castro went into exile in Mexico. There, he met Ernesto Che Guevara, an Argentine doctor, and together they began to organize a revolutionary force. In 1956, Castro, Guevara, and 80 other rebels landed in Cuba aboard the yacht Granma, determined to overthrow Batista. The early days of the revolution were marked by hardship and setbacks. The Granma landing was botched, and many rebels were killed or captured. However, Castro and a small band of survivors escaped into the Sierra Maestra Mountains, where they began a guerrilla war against Batista's forces. Gradually, Castro's rebels gained strength, winning over the support of the peasantry with promises of land reform and social justice. The rebels' ranks swelled with recruits, and their control over the countryside expanded. By 1958, the tide of the war had turned decisively against Batista. Section 5. A Cold War Battlefield, Castro's Cuba and the Bay of Pigs invasion. On January 1, 1959, as rebel forces closed in on Havana, Batista fled the country. Castro's victory marked the end of the Batista regime and the beginning of the Cuban Revolution. The victorious rebels entered Havana, greeted by jubilant crowds celebrating the end of dictatorship. Castro, now the undisputed leader of Cuba, moved quickly to consolidate his power. He implemented sweeping social and economic reforms, nationalizing industries, redistributing land, and expanding access to healthcare and education. These reforms, while popular with many Cubans, alienated the wealthy elite and alarmed the United States. The United States, already wary of Castro's leftist leanings, grew increasingly concerned as Cuba forged closer ties with the Soviet Union. In 1961, the CIA-sponsored Bay of Pigs invasion, an attempt by Cuban exiles to overthrow Castro, ended in disaster. The failed invasion pushed Cuba further into the Soviet orbit and solidified Castro's grip on power. Section 6. The Missile Crisis and its Aftermath. A World on the Brink. The Bay of Pigs fiasco, far from toppling Castro, had the opposite effect. It solidified his power and pushed him closer to the Soviet Union. In 1962, the world held its breath as the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the United States and the Soviet Union to the brink of nuclear war. The crisis was sparked by the Soviet Union's decision to deploy nuclear-armed missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the U.S. mainland. The United States responded with a naval blockade of Cuba, demanding the removal of the missiles. For 13 tense days, the world watched as the two superpowers teetered on the edge of a nuclear abyss. Finally, a deal was struck. The Soviet Union agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba, and the United States pledged not to invade the island. The crisis had a profound impact on Castro, who felt betrayed by Khrushchev's decision to remove the missiles without consulting him. Section 7. Castro's Cuba social reforms and economic challenges. Despite facing constant pressure from the United States, Castro's Cuba underwent a dramatic transformation. His government implemented ambitious social programs, virtually eliminating illiteracy and providing universal health care. Cuba became a beacon of social progress in Latin America, with its high literacy rates and impressive healthcare system. However, Castro's Cuba also faced significant economic challenges. The U.S. embargo, imposed after the revolution, crippled the Cuban economy. Despite Soviet aid, Cuba struggled to achieve economic self-sufficiency. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 dealt a further blow to the Cuban economy. Castro, however, remained defiant. He implemented a series of economic reforms, known as the Special Period, to cope with the loss of Soviet aid. Cuba opened up to limited foreign investment and tourism while maintaining its socialist system. Section 8. A global icon. Castro's influence on revolutionary movements. Fidel Castro's influence extended far beyond the shores of Cuba. He became an icon of revolution, inspiring leftist movements and guerrilla groups across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. His defiance of the United States resonated with many who saw him as a champion of anti-imperialism and national liberation. Castro provided material support to revolutionary movements in countries like Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Angola. Cuban troops fought alongside leftist guerrillas in Africa, helping to end apartheid in South Africa. Castro's Cuba became a training ground for revolutionaries from around the world. However, Castro's support for armed struggle also drew criticism. His critics accused him of exporting revolution and destabilizing the region. Despite the controversy, Castro remained a powerful symbol of resistance to Western imperialism. Section 9. The twilight of a revolutionary Castro's later years and legacy. In 2006, after nearly 5 decades in power, Fidel Castro's health began to decline. He underwent intestinal surgery and temporarily ceded power to his younger brother, Raúl Castro. Although he made occasional public appearances, Castro largely retreated from public life. In 2008, Fidel Castro formally resigned as president of Cuba, handing over the reins of power to Raúl Castro. Raúl Castro, while maintaining Cuba's socialist system, implemented a series of economic reforms, gradually opening up the Cuban economy. Fidel Castro died on November 25, 2016, at the age of 90. His death marked the end of an era, not just for Cuba, but for the world. Castro's legacy remains complex and contested, a mixture of social progress, economic hardship, and unwavering defiance. Section 10. Conclusion. Fidel Castro. A complex legacy. Fidel Castro was a towering figure who left an indelible mark on Cuba and the world. His supporters view him as a revolutionary hero who liberated Cuba from dictatorship and brought social justice to the island. His detractors condemn him as a ruthless dictator who suppressed dissent and turned Cuba into a one-party state. Castro's legacy is a complex one, marked by both achievements and failures. He led a revolution that toppled a dictator and implemented sweeping social reforms, improving the lives of millions of Cubans. However, he also established an authoritarian regime that curtailed political freedoms and stifled economic growth. Castro's Cuba was a Cold War battleground, a symbol of resistance to U.S. imperialism and a staunch ally of the Soviet Union. His defiance of the United States made him a hero to many, but it also came at a cost, isolating Cuba and contributing to its economic woes. Fidel Castro was a complex and contradictory figure, a revolutionary who inspired both admiration and condemnation. His legacy, like his life, will continue to be debated for generations to come.